The fog rests thick and quiet over the rooftops of Brussels. It's the year 1880, though no one outside this narrow, gaslit street would guess it. The horses clop slowly past you, hooves echoing off cobblestone, breath steaming in the morning chill like kettle vapor from a half-woken dream. You walk now toward a grand townhouse, where tall windows stare blankly across the street. Inside, the halls smell faintly of beeswax and linen. Chandeliers hang like upside-down icebergs. You could get lost in this quiet opulence, yet the air feels restless. Upstairs, a boy is already awake. He's small, sharp-faced, and dressed far too formally for someone who's only 6. His hair is parted severely, the collar tight around his neck. He does not complain, he rarely does. He is already learning that discomfort is something you ignore, like a faint draft under the door or the expectations of society. His name is Adrian. Or, more precisely, Adrian Carton de Wiart. He says it quickly, carelessly, as though the title matters less than the sound of it. The son of a wealthy Belgian aristocrat and the ward of a quietly ambitious mother, Adrian is meant to grow up speaking French and Dutch and moving in polite society. But that's not what happens. Adrian speaks English. He insists on it. He reads only British books, mimics the accents of English gentlemen, and seems slightly irritated whenever someone reminds him that he isn't, technically, British. When asked why, he just shrugs. As if he were always meant to belong elsewhere. Or perhaps, nowhere in particular. Downstairs, the household staff mutter over tea. The boy is strange, they whisper. Strange in that silent, stubborn way that makes you feel watched even when he isn't looking at you. And he is always watching. By the time he is 10, Adrian is sent to school in England. You follow him there, your boots sinking into the muddy paths of a country estate turned prep school. The building is cold, drafty, and smells of chalk and boiled cabbage. Adrian fits in with a kind of impatient elegance. He does not care for rules, but he memorizes them anyway so he can avoid the stupid ones and break the clever ones. He is not tall, not particularly strong. But you notice something quiet in him, a stillness that does not break, even under insult or injury. He fights, occasionally. Mostly with words. Sometimes with fists. Always with the unshakable belief that he is not wrong. At Eton, the famed school of gentlemen and troublemakers alike, Adrian sharpens. He picks up fencing, Latin, archery, the art of dodging suspicion. He reads Napoleon's campaigns at night, under a blanket, by candlelight. He finds the idea of dying in battle oddly appealing. It's not bloodlust. Not really. It's just that glory feels warmer than boredom. When he finally announces that he's going to join the army, no one is surprised. They say, "Of course you are." The question isn't why, but when. But first Oxford. A brief and mostly forgettable blur. Adrian is there in body, but not in spirit. He smokes. He debates. He listens to professors with a kind of half-lidded patience. And then, one evening, he simply walks out. Doesn't return. He has other plans. By 1899, war is stirring in South Africa, the British are fighting the Boers. Adrian decides he will not wait for a commission. He lies about his age and enlists under a false name, Trooper Carton. It's the first of many lies he tells to get into war. And you find yourself there beside him now, in the dry dust of the Transvaal. The heat is unforgiving. The air smells of leather and gun oil. Carton, he drops the Adrian in the field, is wide-eyed, exhilarated. This is what he came for. The war is brutal, and the British are not winning easily. Carton volunteers for dangerous missions with a strange enthusiasm. He's wounded, of course he is. But it's the sort of wound that leaves a good scar and a better story. He earns a reputation, even if no one quite knows where he came from. Later, in a moment of calm, someone finally asks, "Who even are you?" And Carton just grins, as if he isn't quite sure himself. One of the sergeants says he's lucky. But you, walking just a pace behind him, already know luck has very little to do with it. You hear the soft creak of leather and parchment as a servant adjusts Adrian's satchel. He's going to boarding school in England now, his own choice, or so he insists. You watch as he marches to the carriage like a soldier already, spine straight, eyes forward, only his small size betraying the fact that he's still a child. The rain taps the roof lightly as the wheels begin to roll through the narrow streets of Brussels. England is grey, colder than Brussels, and more rigid in its rituals. You can feel the starch in the collars, the stiffness in conversation. Adrian fits in oddly well. He is already comfortable with discomfort. You watch him sit perfectly still during chapel, eyes glazed, not from boredom but strategy. He's plotting perhaps how to escape, or how to climb. By the time he's at Oxford, Adrian is restless again. He feels the walls closing in. Academia tastes like dust. He wants action, but there is none to be found in parchment or lecture halls. So he vanishes. Not metaphorically, literally. He disappears from university and reappears, like some strange, young spirit, in South Africa. It's the year 1899. War is breaking out. The Second Boer War has begun, and Adrian has found his calling, or something that looks like it. You can almost hear the distant crackle of rifles, the sand under your boots, the dry heat on your lips. He has no military experience, no commission, and certainly no permission. But here he is. He volunteers, of course. Not as an officer, but a simple trooper. You watch him shed his aristocratic name like a heavy coat. He enlists under a false identity, just Trooper Carton. No one asks why. It's the sort of decision you only make if you have a deep love for either Britain or danger. Possibly both. And then comes the moment, his first real wound. A bullet to the stomach, then another to the groin. He crumples, as any man would, but he does not cry out. It's not in him. He's carried off the battlefield, bleeding and gritting his teeth like it's just another bit of weather to endure. The doctors at the field hospital shake their heads. You're lucky, one mutters. Adrian shrugs. Lucky is relative. Back in England, he's ordered to rest. But rest is a word he resents. It sounds too much like retreat. And so, as soon as he can walk, he returns to Oxford. He lasts barely a term before slipping off again. The university does not bother to protest. By now, they know he is not made for armchairs and academia. You walk beside him now through the moors, the fog swirling around his boots. There is a kind of stillness in him, but also something electric beneath the surface, like a fuse that has yet to be lit. He is waiting for the next war. He won't have to wait long. But for now, he strolls through England as a young man who has already tasted gunpowder and doesn't seem particularly bothered by it. He's not even 25. His limp is faint, his gaze focused, his sense of purpose somehow both absurd and unshakable. It will not be the last time he goes off to war with no invitation. And it will certainly not be the last time he returns with less of himself and more medals than anyone knows what to do with. You rest here now, at the edge of a future that's about to unfold in fire and steel. The wind whispers through the tall grass. In the distance, a bell rings somewhere, soft, uncertain. And the world prepares, once again, to go mad. Correspondent. That's what they call it when a man without rank wants to be near danger but still carry a pen. You ride with Adrian in the open veldt, his fingers ink-stained, his eyes alert not just for ambush but for anecdotes. He reports for the Morning Post, though in truth, he's scouting for meaning. He writes about the war, yes, but also about the shape of clouds before battle, the surprising politeness of enemy prisoners, and the way dust settles after gunfire like nothing ever happened. And then comes the train. You sit beside him in the cramped railcar, the air thick with sweat and gun oil. The train jerks forward on narrow tracks, carrying wounded soldiers and a small band of journalists. Somewhere near Chively, there's a lurch, a screech, and then nothing but twisted metal and cries. The Boers have ambushed the train. Bullets pepper the cars. Horses scream. A lesser man might have ducked. Adrian, naturally, charges. He leaps from the car into chaos. He's not armed, he's a journalist, remember. But he organizes the defense, rescues the wounded, even helps detach the rear cars so they can escape. His hands are black with soot, his mouth dry with adrenaline, and somehow he looks cheerful. This, he seems to say, is life. But then he's captured. Of course he is. The Boers take him to Pretoria, to a prison camp surrounded by barbed wire and boredom. The days stretch long. You can hear the monotony, dull conversations, soup too thin to taste, the melancholy whistle of wine through the fencing. But Adrian does not wilt. He paces. He plans. His mind becomes a hive of escape routes, guard routines, and tunnel depths. It's all quite theatrical. At one point, he hides in the latrine pit for hours, something no one would volunteer to imagine. You wish he wouldn't grin so much when he talks about it. Eventually, disguised as a sick man and slipping through a laundry cart, he vanishes again. When he reappears weeks later, grimy and grinning in Mozambique, it's as though he never left. He walks into a bar, buys a drink, and announces his return like a magician pulling a rabbit from a helmet. London loves it. The newspapers call him a hero. A dashing young adventurer. An escape artist. They print his photograph with smudged ink and extravagant adjectives. And Adrian, still wiping grime from his coat, is swept into politics on a tide of national pride. You ride now through the wood-paneled corridors of Parliament. It smells of old paper and older egos. Adrian, barely 30, is suddenly an MP. He makes speeches about South Africa, about empire and honor, and people listen. Mostly because they don't know what else to do with him. But he's still restless. Always restless. One dry joke: only because you've been so patient, Adrian once claimed he took to politics the way a duck takes to ballroom dancing. Graceful, perhaps, but clearly not designed for the task. The rhythm of peacetime never quite suits him. Parliament is too slow, its arguments too abstract. He misses action, or at least urgency. Even now, you see it, he taps his fingers when speeches go on too long. His eyes wander from the chamber to the door, as if waiting for a bugle call or a distant explosion to summon him somewhere more vivid. And then, as if the universe were tuned to his frequency, something does. A flashpoint. A tremor. The long fuse of Europe's discontent hisses to life. The First World War is whispering through the Balkans. You can feel it, subtle as a breeze, ominous as thunder. Soon, it will roar. Adrian, now more than ever, is listening. Float a memory in, and the distant thrum of a world forgetting you. The air inside the camp is heavy with resignation, and even the guards seem half asleep, lulled by their own routine. You lie on a bunk with Adrian at night, the wood creaking beneath you, the lantern light flickering across the canvas walls like faint echoes of stars you'll never see. But Adrian doesn't settle into captivity. No, that would be far too ordinary. You notice his eyes scanning the fences, the schedules, the guards' patterns, not with despair, but calculation. He borrows a rusty compass. He whispers in corners with fellow prisoners. And at night, you hear the faint scratches of pencil on paper and notes, maps, fragments of what will become both a daring escape plan and, later, the introduction to a book he hasn't written yet. Then one night, the moment comes. While the guards play cards and the shadows grow long, Adrian slips away. No dramatic sprint, just a patient, practiced slide into the dark. You follow quietly, heart thudding, ears straining for footsteps behind you. He doesn't know where he's going. Not exactly. Only that he must go west. He hides in a coal shed for days, soot settling into his pores until he looks more ghost than man. And then he boards a train, not as a passenger, of course, but buried in a pile of sacks, silent as ash. You pass through Felton village, the land stretching wide and open, indifferent to your struggle. He drinks from puddles. He eats whatever crust he can find. Yet still, he hums under his breath, tuneless, cheerful, utterly uncrushed. Finally, after 3 weeks of wandering and narrow escapes, he stumbles into Portuguese East Africa and Mozambique, where he's greeted not with cheers, but with a slightly bewildered colonial officer asking why on earth he looks like he's fought the veldt with his face. He wires London. The papers love it. War correspondent escapes, they declare. And suddenly, Adrian is famous, not for shooting or speeches, but for slipping through the bars of fate with a wink. You sail home beside him, salt air healing the bruises on your body and ego alike. He smokes a cigar on the deck, staring into the waves, and says softly, "I do believe I'll go into politics. Or perhaps write a novel. Or both." You glance at him and wonder if he'll ever sit still. But deep down, you already know the answer. And still, sleep clings to you like an old coat worn, warm, a little too heavy. Keeps going. The journey becomes a dream of dust and determination. Each day feels both eternal and oddly brief, as if the sun, too, is uncertain whether to rise or set. You walk beside Adrian, your boots worn down to whispers, your coat hanging from your shoulders like a weary curtain. Sometimes you pass distant farms, and once, a woman tending goats gives you bread without asking questions. Her eyes flick from Adrian's grimy uniform to the dirt on his face, and though she says nothing, her silence feels like an old prayer. You sleep in ditches and under eucalyptus trees, listening to the wind stir dry grasses. Adrian tells you about England, how it smells in the spring after rain, how London fog curls like lazy smoke through the streets. He hasn't seen it in years, and you can tell the memory is kept alive only by stubborn affection. At last, after weeks that feel like years, Adrian reaches a British consulate in Mozambique. The clerk who greets him blinks, confused, as though trying to remember if they were expecting a soot-covered man with wild eyes and no official papers. Adrian explains everything in his clipped, soldierly fashion. He mentions the camp, the escape, the weeks of walking. The clerk offers tea, possibly out of shock, and listens like a man being handed a story too heavy for his desk to bear. They give Adrian a uniform, finally. Not the one he escaped in, this one's clean, pressed, and smells faintly of soap. He stares at it for a long time before putting it on. You watch him button it slowly, as though slipping back into an old name. He boards a boat bound for Britain, the salt wind tangling his hair and the past trailing behind like a lazy wake. He's not the same man who laughed. But the war hasn't ended yet, and somewhere across the sea, history still waits for him to arrive. You lean against the railing beside him, listening to the gulls cry in the distance, and wonder, quietly, dreamily, if he'll ever truly be free. Back into a skin he'd nearly shed. The clean uniform is unfamiliar now, too crisp, too polite. As he buttons the last fastener, you can almost see the weight of war settle back onto his shoulders like a familiar rucksack. There's no ceremony, no fanfare. Just a soft nod from the consulate officer and a simple, heavy sentence: "You'll be shipped back to London for reassignment." The ship is slow, cutting through the Atlantic with the dreamy grace of something old and tired. You stand on deck most evenings, watching the sky melt into the ocean. Adrian leans on the rail beside you, humming a tune you don't recognize. He's quiet on the sea, less talkative now, less fire, more ash. You suspect the ocean gives him time to think, and perhaps that's not always a mercy. One night, as gulls cry out in the wind and the salt air dances with the scent of coffee from the galley below, he finally speaks. "You'd think escaping a war would be enough to retire a man," he murmurs. "But I suppose duty is a bit like a shadow. Even when you outrun it, you can still feel it following behind." You smile quietly. There's a peculiar comfort in his voice, a resignation so peaceful it almost feels like hope. London emerges like a fog-wrapped dream. The Thames glistens under an overcast sky, and the buildings rise around you with a kind of cold familiarity. Adrian steps off the ship and into the next chapter of his life with no more fanfare than a man picking up his dry cleaning. His boots touch British soil again, but his gaze seems fixed somewhere beyond the skyline, maybe back in the veldt, or perhaps farther still, in the recesses of memory. A week later, he's summoned. Somewhere, in an office with ticking clocks and shelves full of polished wooden files, a general with white hair and far too many medals hands him a fresh assignment. The words come slow and smooth: "We need good men. Men with experience." Adrian doesn't argue. He simply folds the orders, slips them into his breast pocket, and walks out. You trail behind, through corridors that echo with ghosts of wars past and future. There's a strange rhythm to his gait now. Not quite reluctant. Not quite eager. The next few months settle into a quiet routine. Adrian drills, commands, studies maps with familiar lines drawn in unfamiliar places. He trains young recruits, though he rarely raises his voice. His lessons are calm, precise, less about killing, more about surviving. One evening, he invites you to the pub. It's a narrow place with creaky stools and a fireplace that smokes too much. He orders a pint and nurses it like a man catching up with an old friend. Around you, the younger officers talk loudly about future victories and unearned glory. Adrian listens but doesn't speak. Then, turning to you, he smiles. You know, he says, I once tried to retire before this. Right after the Great War. Thought I'd open a bakery in Devon. I even looked at a little shop with red curtains and a crooked sign. But the yeast of peace never quite rose. You laugh, startled by the dry joke, and he chuckles with you low and raspy, like old parchment being folded. Outside, London continues to hum and blink and breathe in that grey, sleepless way cities often do. Inside, you finish your drinks in silence, the kind of silence born not from absence, but from deep, wordless understanding. By the time the orders come, real ones, not drills or papers filed for the sake of routine, Adrian's already polished his boots. You both knew it was coming. The storm was gathering again, this time with darker clouds and louder thunder. But somehow, he still manages to smooth his collar as though preparing for church rather than battle. When the train pulls away from the station, you watch the platform blur past. A woman waves. A boy with a slingshot salutes. And Adrian, leaning back against the seat, closes his eyes, not to sleep, but to remember. War, he once told you, doesn't start with a bang. It starts with a train schedule and a man too tired to resist. And so, off he goes again. In the soft drizzle of London's ever-damp welcome, you walk beside Adrian through streets that remember him, though he barely recognizes them now. The corners are all in the right place, but the bakeries are gone, the children are grown, and the trams hum with a tired urgency. It's 1940 now. The war has grown teeth. The city braces beneath the weight of air raid sirens and blackout curtains. Evenings are darker than they've ever been, as if the very sky knows to hide. Adrian is assigned to a civil defense unit, nothing glamorous, he jokes, just waiting for things to fall and then helping clean them up. But there's a pride in his voice he doesn't bother to mask. Your nights become an odd rhythm of boots on wet pavement and the dull clatter of tea mugs in temporary shelters. You follow Adrian down side streets and alleys, checking for gas leaks and helping old women into basements. There's something humbling in this new kind of war. Less about glory, more about keeping the kettle warm and the walls standing. He grows close with a widow named Mrs. Penfield who insists on giving him a sandwich each time he checks on her flat. War's no excuse to skip lunch, she says firmly, her eyes sharp behind round glasses. Adrian takes the sandwich every time, even if he's just eaten. One night, after a long shift and a near miss with a collapsing rooftop, you both sit on a bench in Hyde Park. The moon filters through the branches like spilled milk. Adrian pulls a small harmonica from his coat and plays a few wandering notes, slow, uncertain, like someone remembering how to dream. I used to think courage meant charging into things, he says softly. But maybe it's more about staying when everything tells you to run. You say nothing. Just breathe in the cold air and listen to the quiet hum of a city refusing to break. Gentle notes, the kind that wander into the night air like smoke, barely there but oddly comforting. The harmonica's melody, simple and familiar, curls around your ears and mingles with the distant hush of the Thames. You sit beside Adrian in the dim park, surrounded by silhouettes of trees and the occasional rustle of leaves. London, even under siege, manages to exhale now and then. He stops playing mid-verse, lowering the instrument into his lap with a sigh that isn't quite tired, just thoughtful. You know, he murmurs, it's strange to be back in a war I thought I'd already buried. The streetlights are off, by order of the blackout, but the stars are unusually generous tonight. Adrian leans back, eyes upward, watching them with a quiet reverence. They look the same as they did in Ypres, he says. That's either comforting or horrifying. I haven't decided yet. By now, he's been reassigned to a logistics role, a small mercy. His days are spent coordinating transport of supplies, checking on bomb shelters, and occasionally, rescuing a stranded cat or two from a crumbling roof. You tag along, a quiet observer to the slow shift in his posture. He's older now, but not old. Slower, but not still. somewhere between stubborn youth and reluctant elder. You pass a church that's lost half its roof, its bell leaning against rubble like a tired sentinel. Adrian pauses, tipping his cap. "Married my first wife there," he says, almost to himself. You don't press for more. The war has taken many things from many people. Some details are better left gently folded in memory's drawer. One afternoon, while hauling crates of canned beans for a shelter in Paddington, he stops mid-step, places the crate down carefully, and says, "I think I'll retire again." You look at him, sweat on his brow, mud on his boots, the faint shadow of a grin playing across his lips. "Third time's the charm, they say," he adds, chuckling. Or was that weddings? I forget. But even as he says it, you both know retirement doesn't come easy to men like Adrian. He doesn't like sitting still. Stillness brings back the faces, the trenches, the noise beneath silence. So instead, he volunteers part-time at a hospital, reading to wounded soldiers. He picks novels with long, meandering plots, the kind that take ages to finish. The nurses appreciate his consistency, even if they chuckle at his outdated slang. By winter, the Blitz has changed the skyline. Churches are now scaffolding, rooftops are canvases of tarpaulin, and chimneys lean like tired old men. Adrian carries his harmonica in his coat pocket like a good luck charm. You've heard him play it more often lately, soft tunes, nostalgic and slightly off-key. One evening, after reading aloud to a soldier with bandaged eyes, Adrian stands at the window, looking out over a sleeping city. "They say this one will be the war to end all wars," he whispers. You don't answer. Neither does the wind. He sits down, slowly, back creaking louder than the chair, and picks up the book again. "Chapter 4, he says gently. "Let's begin, shall we?" And as his voice rises, calm, slow, kind, the words drift through the ward like a lullaby, and you feel the quiet work of healing begin. The morning air in London carries the scent of coal smoke and fresh bread, odd companions, but familiar ones. You walk alongside Adrian as he navigates the narrow lanes of a neighborhood that somehow managed to remain standing. The war is a hum in the background now, present, but not overwhelming. And in its lulls, life insists on being lived. Children chase one another between sandbags and shelters, their laughter as reckless and bright as it must have been before anyone taught them to duck for cover. Adrian watches them, arms crossed, leaning against a postbox dented by shrapnel. "We used to play football on trenches," he muses. "Didn't matter if it was mud or no man's land, if someone found a tin can, the match was on." You help him carry crates of ration tins up the steps of a boarding house that's taken in a dozen evacuees from the countryside. Inside, the hall smells of boiled cabbage and mothballs. A wiry old woman with arms like broom handles offers tea in a chipped floral cup, which Adrian accepts with courtly grace. "It's a war when they still offer you tea," he says quietly, sipping the overbrewed warmth with the reverence of a man who knows what cold tastes like. Later, in a cluttered back office lit by a single lantern, he leans over a map marked with red pins and smudges of ink. He's showing a younger corporal how to reroute supply lorries around a cratered bridge when a memory seems to catch up with him. "In France, we used pigeons," he says suddenly. "Little feathered heroes. One of them saved an entire battalion. Got a medal, even. Not sure if they saluted him or fed him extra grain." The corporal laughs, nervously at first, then genuinely. Adrian doesn't smile, but his eyes crease, ever so slightly. He looks not quite proud, but not quite haunted either. As if he's found a shelf in his mind to place these things, neatly, carefully, like medals or ghosts. You find yourself wondering if he'll ever really stop fighting. Not on the field, perhaps, but in the quiet rooms of his memory. In the tea he drinks, the maps he marks, the children he watches sprint through ruins with the careless glee of those who've never seen a front line. That night, you return with him to his modest flat, 4th floor, no lift. He doesn't complain, even as he pauses to catch his breath halfway up. "Still beats trenches," he mutters. Inside, the flat is full of small, unremarkable things: slippers by the fire, a dog-eared novel by the chair, a photograph of 3 young men in uniforms too big for their frames. One of them is Adrian. Barely 20. Somehow already him. He offers you a biscuit that could likely dent a helmet. You accept it anyway. He chuckles. War teaches you to eat anything. Even optimism, if you season it well. The fireplace sputters, and he lights a small oil lamp, casting soft shadows that make the walls feel less like a room and more like a memory. You sit quietly, letting the silence settle, letting the hum of distant planes become part of the rhythm of rest. And as Adrian dozes in his chair, mouth slightly open, fingers loosely curled around an empty teacup, you realize that even in a world carved open by conflict, people still dream. Still carry their ghosts with dignity. Still wake up every morning to do it all again, not because they love the fight, but because something gentle survives in them anyway. Something stubbornly human. One could almost call it peace. Or, at least, the steady practice of it. In France, we used pigeons, Adrian had said, and the room had chuckled, lightly. But now, as you walk beside him through the cold corridors of memory, the joke becomes a doorway into something more. Into an old story folded neatly into the years like a handkerchief stashed in a uniform pocket. You follow Adrian down a lane edged with frost-touched hedgerows. It's a dreamlike countryside, one he hasn't seen in decades, but recalls as if it's waiting just beyond the fog. The year is 1918 again. The war is near its end, but no one knows it yet. He's back in the mud of Flanders, in the grey dawn before an offensive, when silence feels heavier than gunfire. He was tasked then with the improbable job of coordinating messenger pigeons, birds with medals, as it turned out later. You see him crouched in a dugout, murmuring to the tiny beady-eyed creatures, pinning messages to their legs with fingers stiff from cold. They coo softly, indifferently, as if oblivious to the fact that they might be shot midair by a bored sniper. One pigeon in particular, named Algernon, because why not, was his favorite. He brought back word from a company pinned down near Ypres, Adrian says, looking off. Save the lot of them. Bloke in that company ended up marrying my sister. It's strange, the things that war preserves. Not just medals and uniforms, but stories of birds, and boots too big, and one-eyed cooks who somehow made potato stew taste like home. You imagine the Adrian of that time, young and lanky, trousers too short, ducking under barbed wire and cradling pigeons like precious letters. In the present, Adrian laughs softly. They gave me a commendation for that. Not for dragging a wounded officer back over a ditch under fire. Not for fixing the calms with a penknife and some chewing gum. No pigeons. He shrugs. Right lot of romantics, the brass. You both pass a stone wall where ivy creeps in slow curls. It's the site of an old hospital now long gone, but Adrian points to it like it's still there. Spent 2 weeks in that ward once, shrapnel in the leg. The nurse called me Captain Limpy. Fell in love with her voice before I even saw her face. She read Wodehouse aloud every night. There's a pause as you both stand in the shadow of memory. The imagined sounds of that ward, distant coughs, the rustle of bandages, a nurse's dry humor over a Wodehouse punchline, flutter like ghost pigeons through the trees. And just then, Adrian reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out something round and bronze. He presses it into your hand. A pigeon medallion. Algernon's award. He didn't care for it. But I figured someone ought to. The metal is cool in your palm, and impossibly heavy. You don't say anything. You just walk on, as the hedgerow bends, and the fog thickens like sleep wrapping its soft arms around the day. You trail Adrian through a village square soaked in the golden hush of memory. The pigeons fade behind you, replaced by the click of boots on cobblestones, the faint ringing of a bicycle bell somewhere in the distance. It's no longer the trenches or the pigeon lofts. It's Paris, 1920, and Adrian has just done the unthinkable, resigned. Not dramatically, of course. There were no trumpet fanfares, no officers weeping into their whiskies. He simply submitted his papers, buttoned up his civilian coat, and boarded a train without looking back. The war had ended, and so, he thought, had his duty. He had dreams now of something simpler. A small bookshop perhaps. A garden. A cat with no particular opinions about politics or troop deployments. You walk with him as he adjusts to peacetime, which, ironically, feels more disorienting than any battlefield ever did. The streets are peaceful, but beneath the surface there's a jitter, people laugh too loudly, drink too deeply, or throw themselves into work as if trying to outpace ghosts. Adrien, for his part, starts teaching at a quiet lycée near Dijon, where the children call him Monsieur Delorme and are politely unimpressed by his stories of gas masks and carrier pigeons. One of the children once asked, "Did you ever see a ghost in the war?" He'd paused a long time before answering. "Only once," he'd said. "And it was wearing my boots." You see him now in the faculty lounge, drinking lukewarm coffee and listening to a colleague debate the finer points of Voltaire. He's restless in this new quiet. His hands, trained to load rifles and pen reports, now correct essays in red ink. He finds himself waking at 4 a.m. for no reason, sitting by the window and watching the world breathe. Some nights, he dreams of Algeria, distant deserts and the scent of orange blossom and wakes with sand in his mind. Other times, he hears the soft flutter of wings and thinks for a moment that Algernon has returned. But mostly, he's content. Or trying to be. You can feel it, the slow stretch of peace settling into his bones like sunlight through old curtains. He takes long walks by the river, buys fresh bread each morning, and, just once, takes a dance class on a dare. He is awkward and apologetic and trips over his own feet, but he laughs, a laugh that surprises even him. And yet, as spring comes and goes, a new tension begins to thrum faintly in the background. A change in the air. You hear it in the rustling newspapers, in the tightened jawlines of once carefree colleagues. A name, Hitler, makes its first shy appearance in dinner-table conversations, whispered like a cold draft under the door. Adrien tries not to notice. He sharpens pencils. He reads poetry. He avoids the post office. But history, as you and Adrien both know by now, does not like to be ignored. It's patient, yes, but never truly silent. One evening, while walking home through a gentle drizzle, he pauses by a shop window filled with radios. A crackling voice in German speaks too fast for him to follow, but the tone is enough. Something old stirs in his chest, not fear, exactly, but recognition. He stands there a long time, coat slowly soaking through, until the shopkeeper politely closes the curtain. Later that night, as he dries his socks by the fire, Adrien sighs. "I was supposed to be done," he says aloud to no one in particular. The fire pops quietly, offering no argument. You sit with him in the stillness. The kind of stillness that only happens when a man is trying very hard not to make a decision he already knows he'll make. Because when the drums start again, even faintly, some part of him will always lean in to listen. He pours himself a small glass of cognac, and smiles faintly at the fire. "At least this time," he murmurs, "I'll bring my own boots." And with that, you feel the scene exhale around you. The wind shifts slightly. A page turns somewhere in the unseen corners of the room. The story isn't finished, just gently pausing, like a man waiting for the next train without checking the schedule. Of Latin grammar, his eyes gently drifting toward the window, where a bird hops between branches. He hasn't mentioned pigeons in years, not even when asked directly. It's as if the bird-shaped shadows of his past perch quietly on his shoulders, but no longer demand to be named. Yet still, the world does not leave him alone. One spring morning in 1935, Adrien receives a telegram. It's not from a soldier, not from a government office, but from an old friend, a fellow veteran turned intelligence clerk. The message is brief, almost apologetically so, Adrien. Something is coming. Germany is not done. Be ready. You sit with him in that quiet moment afterward, the silence in his small Dijon apartment thick with unspoken decisions. He doesn't rush to reply. He folds the telegram, puts it in a drawer with a photograph of his regiment, and goes out into the garden to water the cabbages. Years pass. The world tilts again, and this time it tilts hard. 1939 arrives with stiff uniforms and the smell of diesel. Posters go up. Boarders get nervous. And one morning, just before dawn, Adrien finds himself standing once more at a train platform, not to flee, not to visit, but to re-enlist. He's older now. The uniform itches. His left shoulder clicks ominously when he turns too fast. But his mind is sharp, and his instincts are as clean and well-oiled as ever. They give him a desk job at first, something about logistics. He pretends to be grateful, but in truth, he's already mapping his escape. By the third week, he's attached himself to a signals unit near the Belgian border. The war opens like a door kicked in by a storm. The blitzkrieg is a blur of smoke and mud and screaming radio wires. Adrian watches younger men scramble and scatter, some with courage, some with fear, all with that strange glow of people who've never been shot at before. He doesn't blame them. He remembers what that first fear feels like. The taste of iron in the mouth, the strange awareness of your own heartbeat. But he also knows what comes after, the numbing, the routine, and sometimes the calm that arrives like a surprising friend. One evening, when the radios fall silent and the sky is ash pink with the last light of a bombed-out day, Adrian finds himself sitting with a young private named Marshal. The boy is no more than 18, his hands shaking over a tin cup of something that used to be coffee. Is it always like this? Marshal asks, voice tight. Adrian takes a long moment before replying. Not always. Sometimes it rains. The joke is so dry it takes Marshal a full 5 seconds to laugh, but when he does, it's with a genuine warmth that cuts through the cold. Adrian offers him a cigarette, and they sit quietly, side by side, the smoke curling like memories above their heads. The next morning, they're moving again, retreating, regrouping, reforming. Paris falls. The government reshuffles like a tired deck of cards. The resistance begins to whisper, and the air changes once more. You notice it too, the tension in the ground, in the way people glance over their shoulders. Adrian is asked, more than once, to step aside. You've done enough, they say. You're past the age. Let the younger men carry it now. But he doesn't step aside. He just smiles, folds his hands behind his back, and says, I've retired once before. It didn't suit me. That night, in a dimly lit tent with maps scattered like fallen leaves, Adrian reads reports with a lantern swaying gently beside him. The wind tugs at the canvas, and you can almost hear the old voices again, the sergeant, the pigeon handler, the friend who vanished in a trench. He still writes in his journal. Neat cursive. He doesn't write about glory or strategy. He writes about what the bread tasted like that morning. About the way Marshal snores with one nostril. About the way the sky looked just before dawn, like the inside of a pearl, he notes, with surprising tenderness. Outside, a sentry shifts, coughs, stamps his boots. The war continues. But inside the tent, there's a curious kind of peace. Adrian folds his map. He turns down the lantern. And as you sit with him in the gentle dark, listening to the soft breath of a soldier who never really stopped marching, you realize something. He didn't return to fight. He returned to remember. The nearest infantry routs in his head, as though his feet remember what his superiors have forgotten. But war, like time, rarely asks for permission. And one rainy autumn evening in 1940, Adrian finds himself not behind a desk but beside a ditch in northern France, once again under fire. The command had collapsed. Retreats turned into routs. He had volunteered just to help the younger lads get their bearings, he had said, and somehow, as if history insisted, he was back in the mud. You're with him as he squints at a folded map by lamplight, marking crossroads with the same careful penmanship he once used to grade essays. You feel the small steel warmth of a ration tin in his coat pocket. You hear the drizzle ticking against the tin helmet that never quite fits anymore. He's a captain now, not that ranks matter much when everyone's scattered, and the enemy is a rumor that's always one town closer than yesterday. Still, he keeps moving. He organizes a small group of lost soldiers. French, Polish, even a Belgian radio operator with a stutter and a fondness for boiled eggs. They call themselves Les Retards, not out of insult, but in wry honor of their talent for always arriving late to where the fight just was. Adrian smiles at the name. Late is better than never. They travel at night, resting in barns, walking along hedgerows. One evening, a farmer's wife insists on feeding them lentil soup so rich with garlic that it practically counts as a bath. The soldiers laugh. Adrian, listening to the wind against the shutters, wonders briefly if this is what being alive truly means, not medals or ranks or retirement papers, but warm soup in a kitchen with peeling paint. But peace does not linger. Eventually, the group is cornered near the Loire by a German patrol. They scatter into the forest, and for the second time in his life, Adrian is declared missing. This time, however, he isn't shot. Nor does he vanish into bureaucratic fog. Instead, he is found by a family of winemakers, hidden in a root cellar beneath rows of dusty bottles marked with a vintage he can't afford. He stays for 3 weeks, helping with the harvest under the name Monsieur Bellamy. He tells stories to the children, prunes vines, and once, accidentally, makes a truly dreadful attempt at bottling. You're there, feeling the cool earth under your feet, the smell of grapes crushed by hand, and the gentle creak of old wood above. Adrian laughs more during these weeks than he has in years, though every sunset reminds him he must keep moving. Eventually, the resistance makes contact. He joins them briefly, mostly to pass messages and help plan minor sabotage. He never boasts. He listens more than he speaks. He wears his second uniform beneath his smile. And finally, when the Allied forces begin to push back across France, Adrian quietly steps back, like an actor leaving the stage just before the applause. He returns to Dijon alone. No parade. No telegram. No welcome committee. He walks into his apartment, brushes the dust from the windowsill, and boils water for tea. Outside, a car backfires. He doesn't flinch. Not anymore. He sits in his armchair, a little heavier in the bones, a little lighter in the heart. He never speaks of medals. Never corrects those who assume he never left his post as a teacher. But when the night air comes cool and silent, sometimes he dreams in semaphore. And sometimes, only sometimes, he laughs in his sleep. Shudders, lets the warmth of the hearth soak into his bones. It's been decades since his first time in France, and yet somehow, the air smells the same: wet soil, sheep, wood smoke, and distant thunder that might be guns or just the weather being theatrical. You sit beside him on the rough bench as the fire crackles and the farmer's hound sleeps at your feet. Adrian pulls out a small notebook, not for orders this time, but sketches. He draws the outline of the barn, the curve of the woman's smile, the crooked teeth of the sleeping dog. The other soldiers are asleep, their breathing soft, like waves on an old wooden boat. He hasn't carried a rifle in days. His role, somehow, has drifted from soldier to shepherd. He leads them away from the worst of it, always a half day ahead of trouble. He knows which villages have a working well, which abbeys will give shelter, which path through the hills hides them from the air. And all the while, something deeper stirs in him, an ache not just of the body, but of longing. Not for youth, which he has long since left behind, but for stillness. For a patch of garden that isn't a trench. For a roof without holes. For a morning that begins with birdsong instead of boots stomping awake. You cross into Normandy just as the apple blossoms bloom. The trees, with their pink-white puffs, seem unaware of the war entirely. Adrian chuckles quietly one morning, pointing out that the orchard smells like the cider festivals of his boyhood. He reminisces about tumbling drunk into a pond, Chaz. About a harvest once, long ago, when he was no older than 17. He'd carried barrels rather than bandoliers, rolled apples down the sloped barn floor into waiting sacks, and stolen kisses in the hayloft. His hands had been sticky with juice instead of soot. You listen, the road underfoot soft with fallen petals, the air heavy with spring's perfume and a slow kind of forgetting. At last, a message reaches you. The end is near. The Allies are pressing in, the front curling away from you like the last ember of a dying fire. The war, they say, will soon be over. Adrian hears this not with joy, but with a hollow nod, as though peace is a thing that must first be proven real over time, not declared overnight. You arrive in a quiet village with a crooked church and a bakery that somehow never stopped baking. Adrian is offered a cot in the vestry, and you spend the days helping repair shutters, planting potatoes, listening to the old priest murmur Latin lullabies as he dusts relics no one remembers. It is here that Adrian, once more, tries to retire. This time, he doesn't write it as a letter. He simply doesn't leave the village. His uniform is hung in a cupboard that smells of lavender and flour. His boots are placed neatly beneath the cot, polished one last time. And each morning, he helps the baker knead dough, his thick fingers surprisingly gentle. He doesn't speak of the battles. Not anymore. He tells stories about animals he's seen, jokes shared in trenches, a sergeant who swore birds could understand Morse code. You laugh with him, slowly, and notice the deep furrows on his face begin to soften. One night, while the moon drips silver across the stone floor, you watch him stand before the church window. He hums a tune old, perhaps Roman, perhaps invented. His hands are still. His heart is calm. He has, at last, arrived at silence. You feel the hush settle over him like a wool blanket. The soldier has stopped marching. And now, so can you. The night stretches wide and still. Sleep, now, is not an escape, it is a homecoming.